Hey there, welcome back to another review, this time of the 1986 sci-fi fantasy SpaceCamp. Now, this is a film that I heard of, but I never saw until recently, and to be honest, I honestly thought it was really lame. I thought it was a lame, forgettable, boring movie that I really don't have any desire watching ever again. Now, is it one of the worst things I've ever seen? No. Is it completely devoid of any merits? No. But I would definitely would not say I like this movie, and I wouldn't even say I thought it was a time waster or I thought it was okay or mediocre. I definitely feel this is a prime example of a below average sci-fi movie for kids or a family film. I don't understand all these great reviews from Joel Siegel. This is a rare film you can take your kids to and you'll all enjoy it. I know if I watched this when I was a kid, I would be bored out of my mind. And I know if I tried to show this to if I had ended up having kids and I tried to show this movie to my kids, they would also be bored out of their minds watching SpaceCamp. A blast for kids and a blast off for grown-ups. Newhouse Newspapers. Who is Newhouse Newspapers? Does that newspaper even exist anymore? Probably not, because they have people who review movies like this that are all like, yeah, blast off for kids and a blast off for grown-ups. How is this a blast off for grown-ups? A fast-paced adventure fantasy, cheerful, optimistic, a wholesome and fun-filled diversion. New York Times. That's it. That's pretty much what it is. It's a diversion. I mean, if there's nothing else on, you could probably watch Space Camp, but really, there's a lot better movies out there than Space Camp. Um, Space Camp is directed by Harry Weiner. This is the same guy who went on to direct House Arrest. This is not a guy who's known for directing a lot of movies. He directed a bunch of TV shows before he did this. It shows because he's not really comfortable here. The direction needed somebody that was, I don't know, more experienced. So they had a very just inexperienced director here who really wasn't able to give this concept the size and the scope and the spectacle that it needed in order to make it rise above the competition. It's based on a screenplay by Clifford Green and Casey T. Mitchell, which is based apparently upon a book by Patrick Bailey and Larry B. Williams, which is based on uh, the U.S. Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama. So that's just inspired by things that happened at the space camp. It also features a score by John Williams, which is one of the few things about this movie that I genuinely liked. I thought the score by John Williams was good, as always. It's really a baffling score. I mean, why did John Williams agree to do the score for this movie of all things? I mean, I'm guessing the studio was paid him a ton of money and basically gave him an offer he can't refuse. So, I could totally understand that. But at the same time, it's just like this is a total standout on his repertoire. It's one of those things where you look at it, like Space Camp. What? John Williams did the score for that movie. Um, it also features a cinematography by William A. Fraker. It's edited by Tim Board and John W. Wheeler. Tim Board sums up the film rather nicely. Edited by Tim Board, who was probably bored while he was editing the footage. This film is, like I said, it's lame. It's just a lame movie. It's terminally lame. It's slow paced. It takes way too long for these kids to get into space. And when they do, it's not interesting. It's not exciting. And it's not memorable. There's not a lot of suspense. There's not a lot of intrigue. In fact, I honestly thought the film was more intriguing and interesting when it was just on Space Camp. When it was they were just at Space Camp, and the kids were, training with Kate Capshaw, and they were learning how to be astronauts. That I thought was more interesting and fun than the stuff when they got to space. When they got to space, and how they got to space, that's a whole other story. How they got to space is just an absolute absurd, moronic way There's just an absolute fail of storytelling, if you ask me. But once they get to space, I lose interest in the film. I might as well be floating in space along with the space trash. In fact, I'd like to throw this film into space and have it float along, out there into the vacuum of space with all the other space garbage. So anyway, this is a film that is somewhat infamous because it was sponsored and actually I wouldn't say funded by NASA, but NASA gave the producers and the company, all 20th Century Fox gave them, the ability to shoot inside a space camp. And basically, you could say it's sponsored technically by NASA. And of all things, yeah, filmed on location at the U.S. Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama. So it's infamous because around the time that this film came out, the tragic Challenger disaster occurred when the Challenger space shuttle exploded during launch. And what makes this film pretty infamous is that the film was supposed to be released around the same time as the launch happened, but then the explosion happened, and so the film was pushed back. It was pushed forward from its original release date. It also, it's another film. This film also was not it's not well received by critics. It didn't do very well in the box office. It was a budget of 18 million or 25 million, depending on what source you look at, and it only made $9 million. So it didn't do anything in the box office. It was a bomb. And also what makes it infamous is there's a storyline that deals with, okay, this stupid robot named Jinx. He takes everything literally. So he overhears this kid, Max, who this robot is friends with, talk about how he'd rather be in space. So in order to get Max to space, finds a way to cause a malfunction on the space shuttle while Max and these other space campers are there, doing a little sort of run through and an engine check. And he finds a way to cause thermal curtain failure, which is very similar to the actual failure that caused this Challenger explosion. That is something that is very hard to get away from. I mean, it's eerie. It's kind of eerie, to be honest, because this was shot and edited, and this was written and filmed before the Challenger exploded. Now, there's one thing though that I don't get from the critics is when they say that this film is just profiting off the Challenger explosion and off of a disaster and a tragedy. And they criticize the film heavily because of that. First off, this film was made and finished before the Challenger exploded. Second, um, I don't see how releasing the movie is profiting off of the disaster, off of the tragedy, because if it really was, then Fox would have released the film on its original release date, but they didn't do that. They pushed it forward. So I'm not really a fan of this movie. I think it's boring. I think it's lame. I think it's forgettable. But I would not actually say it's bad and it's morally bankrupt or whatever because it's trying to profit off of the Challenger tragedy. But that's just my personal opinion. Anyway, this film, you can't talk about this movie without mentioning the Challenger. I mean, that's just so sad about this. You get this really just very lame, forgettable movie that's sponsored by NASA, and it came out around the same time as the Challenger explosion. And then and the film also just doesn't, it looks very cheap. That's another thing, and I'll get to that later, but yeah, I just, it's kind of a hard film to talk about because of the tragedy that happened so near to its release date. So anyway, the film stars Kate Capshaw as Andy Bergstrom, who's a camp instructor and an astronaut. You have Tom Skerritt, who plays Zach, her husband. He's a camp director. You also have Lea Thompson, who plays Catherine Fairley, who's a pilot, and she's one of the campers who goes to SpaceCamp. Tate Donavan plays Kevin Donaldson. Tate Donavan he's a poor man's Dennis Quaid with a tiny hint of Gary Busey, especially when he smiles. You also have Larry B. Scott, who plays Rudy Tyler. Larry B. Scott was one of the nerds in Revenge of the Nerds. You have Kelly Preston, before she went on to marry John Travolta, playing this typical Valley Girl teenager. But the main difference is she's actually very intelligent, and she has a photographic memory. Then you have Joaquin Phoenix, who's credited as Lee Phoenix, as Max Graham, this 12-year-old boy who's just annoying and is just spouting Star Wars references. And is honestly, it's amazing to me that Joaquin Phoenix went on to be as good of an actor as he is, because he is absolutely atrocious here as the kid Max. And then you also have the ever-talented Frank Welker, who plays the voice of Jinx, the robot that befriends Max. Um, Welker's definitely done better. This robot is just so lame. Frank Welker. This is what he's asked to do: is sound really annoying and high pitched and whatever. I hope he got paid a good amount of money for this. I do, because he had to say lines like this: "Friends forever." Jinx and Max, friends forever. Just send Max to space. Yeah, really, really. Anyway, the film starts out with you have these four teens. Catherine actually start out with I don't know why, a flashback with this young girl who can't act worth a damn, and she's looking up. She's sitting in a cornfield and she's looking up at the sky and looking at shooting stars, and she's talking about how she wants to be an astronaut. And then it flashes forward, and I guess this little girl was growing up to be Kate Capshaw. It was an absolutely pointless opening sequence. It's like a short flashback that has no business being there. It's such a weird setup, because that's the only bit of character development I guess you get for this character played by Kate Capshaw. Kate Capshaw, this is probably one of the better performances from her that I've noticed, and I liked her here. And I like Lea Thompson. And some of the other kids were, they were there. Kelly Preston, I honestly didn't think was that great. Um, but they just weren't written very well. They had a little bit of personality, but they didn't have any character development. They were just, oh, this person has this particular character flaw, and this person has this particular character flaw, and by the end of the movie, they're gonna have to fix those character flaws. That's pretty much all their character development is character flaws. I'm sorry, I think that's kind of a flawed way to characterize your main characters in your movie. So these teenagers, they go to space camp at the Kennedy Space Center near Cape Canaveral, Florida. I guess, but apparently it's supposed to, they shot it in Alabama one, but it's supposed to be at Florida. And for 3 weeks during the summer to learn about the NASA space program and to mimic astronaut training. They meet their instructor, Andy Bergstrom, played by Kate Capshaw, a NASA-trained astronaut who is frustrated that she has not yet been assigned to a shuttle mission. Her bitterness is compounded by the fact that her husband, camp director Zach Bergstrom, played by Tom Skerritt, is an astronaut who has walked on the moon. These two, that's all that. That's all the characterization you really get for Tom Skerritt. In fact, Tom Skerritt is wasted in this film. He has nothing to do. He just sits there, says a few things. He's the mission control guy, and that's it. You also have Terry O'Quinn, who's also in this as well as one of the guys working at mission control, and he's wasted too. You have two very talented actors who are literally just sitting there doing nothing, sticking a thumb up their ass, while a fucking stupid robot, a talking robot, who takes everything literally, and is really painful comic relief at times, is has way more screen time than these two very talented actors. I don't get it. I really don't. So Max befriends this robot named Jinx, which was deemed unsuitable for space work because it was overly literal, and if it did something like its chip or something, it would get too overheated or whatever. Who cares? It doesn't really matter. It's a defective space robot that costs millions of dollars. So Max and this robot declare themselves to be friends forever. And meanwhile, Kevin pursues Catherine romantically, and there's no chemistry, so it doesn't really go anywhere either. It's just really a pointless subplot. Rudy shares his wish to open the first fast food franchise on the moon, which is dumb. Tish reveals that despite her appearing to be a valley girl, she's a genius. She has a photographic memory. Catherine and Kevin sneak away for some romance near the launch pad, but Jinx unconventionally gives them away. Blah 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 blah. Just very exciting, just stuff that's it feels like filler. It feels like filler. This whole first 40 minutes just feels like filler. We're filling we're filling the runtime and building up to when these kids get sent to space, but it's just not very interesting. And to be honest, the idea of them being at SpaceCamp I kind of like, and I honestly think the film, if it was better written, then I would honestly made it more like Top Gun, but in SpaceCamp. So you have the best of the best when it comes to these young students, and they compete at SpaceCamp to see who's the best trainee. I think that could have been fun. And you didn't need to have the fantasy element of these kids going up into space. And you wouldn't have to really connect it. There wouldn't be uncomfortable connections to the Challenger either, because it just stays grounded. It stays on Earth. Add a little bit more realism to it. So anyway, so you have this just filler stuff. Andy, the Andy and Zach discover they are missing because Jinx gives them away because he can't keep a secret. There's a confrontation between Andy and Catherine because Andy, Catherine's wondering why are you so hard on me? And Andy explains that she's hard on her because she believes that she has what it takes to accomplish her dreams and to be a flight commander. And she explains that, the harsh treatment that I gave you is necessary in order for you to be able to accomplish that. Catherine vows to improve her performance. Zach's conversation with Kevin is less successful because he goes in and he's trying to. It just doesn't work very well. Because Kevin is just a hothead. Kevin takes out his anger on Max in a very cringe-inducing scene in terms of performance-wise, because the Tate Donavan here, very terrible line delivery when he's trying to be angry at Max. Max states, "I wish I was in space." This is where you have the stupidity of the robot hears that, and is like, and of course it takes everything literally, so he's all like, send Max to space. So the group then are allowed to sit in the space shuttle Atlantis during a routine engine test, and then Jinx secretly enters NASA's computer room and triggers a thermal curtain failure, which causes one of the boosters to ignite during the test, which is very, like I said, very similar to what happened when the Challenger exploded. And in order to avoid a crash, Launch Control is forced to ignite the second booster and launch the shuttle. So then you have the drama. The shuttle's not flight ready. They don't have enough oxygen to be able to survive long enough so NASA can remotely get them in the right trajectory and land them on Earth. So you have this whole drama with that. They can't communicate with NASA because they don't have the right equipment. And so then you have this sequence where they realize, okay, we need to go find some oxygen. And so they go to this space station called Daedalus to retrieve the oxygen that's stored there. And Kate Capshaw gets in the astronaut, gets into the spacesuit and goes out and tries to get the oxygen tanks. And you can tell that this is clearly shot on a set and behind a green screen. But I mean, the effects could look worse, but they could look better too, especially with the space shuttle. The scenes with the space shuttle, it clearly is a model. They're not even trying to cover up the fact that it's a model. It doesn't move very well. It just kind of just it's just there. They might as well be hanging it off of some string. So I admit this is a somewhat decent sequence where Kate Capshaw is trying to get the oxygen tanks off the Daedalus. But, this is like over an hour into the movie. A movie that's an hour and 43 minutes, which is way too long for a movie like this. So, eventually, she can't seem to get the oxygen, so the kid, Max, suits up and goes in and helps her, get the oxygen tanks. But then he also starts floating away, so then Andy saves him. And all the while, of course, he's making Star Wars references. Of course, he was freaked out. He didn't think he could do it, but because Kevin says that because Kevin starts calling him Luke and tells him to use the Force. This calms him down enough, and then he completes the mission. And Max and Andy can retrieve the containers, and in the shuttle, there's a little drama with Rudy trying to decipher the technical schematics to work out how to feed the oxygen in the shuttle tanks, but he is not confident in what he's saying. So Catherine reads the diagram herself and gives Andy instructions that conflict with Rudy's, but Andy follows Rudy's instructions, which happen to be correct. This ties into a character flaw that Catherine had earlier when they were testing out. They were together in one of these like simulation things, and they were testing and trying to test out how they work together, and they couldn't work together, and then Catherine tried to take control, and she was in the wrong, and so on. Call this movie Space Cliches. Space Cliche. Space Cliche, the movie. See, I don't really have problems with cliches in movies if it's entertaining. This just wasn't that entertaining to me. So the second oxygen container malfunctions. It causes Andy to be injured. Ground control begins the autopilot sequence to land the shuttle. And of course, earlier they were able to communicate with NASA through Morse code that the robot was able to recognize, but the highly trained individuals who work at NASA were not able to recognize that the space shuttle Atlantis was trying to communicate with ground control, with Morse code. I mean, this is so stupid. It's not only lame, it's not only really lame on more than one occasion, it's also really dumb. So Andy's out. The ground control is beginning the autopilot sequence to land the shuttle. The bay doors get closed. This strands Andy outside, but Kevin actually makes a decision to save Andy, even though Andy's saying, "Go, you're gonna miss the window," and so they say, "No, we're not gonna let her die." So they turn on manual pilot, turn off the autopilot, and they save her. And the shuttle does not have enough oxygen to make the next window. But Catherine, that's the whole thing. Kevin shows that he's finally the shuttle commander, and he overrides the autopilot, enabling Max to rescue Andy. And then they miss the Edwards reentry window, but then the crew comes up with a plan to land at White Sands, New Mexico. Because out of the blue, because the script said so, Catherine remembers that in the 1982 space shuttle mission landed there. So Tish then uses Morse code to send the signal to NASA to let them land there. And that's the one where Jinx understands it, but everyone else doesn't. Tom Skerritt and Terry O'Quinn are just standing there being like, "Duh, what?" And they're like, "Get that robot out of here! Get it out of here!" And the robot's like, "White Sands, Morse code." And then, Tom Skerritt's like, "Oh yeah, Morse code, look, Morse code." I mean, it is what it is, folks. So at ground control, Jinx brings the signal to Zach's attention. Like I said, they prepare for the White Sands landing. Andy is injured. She's like got a broken rib, broken arm. Catherine has to pilot the space shuttle. She doubts her abilities, and she's stuck in a flat spin while they're trying to attempt re-entry. But Kevin teases her into landing the shuttle, and she lands it. And the movie actually ends with stock footage, I swear to God, of just a space shuttle landing. And that's how it ends. You don't see them get off the space shuttle. You don't see them reunite with the ground control. You don't see Kate Capshaw, reunite with her husband. You don't see any of that. It just space shuttle lands, end credits. I mean, if you want this type of movie with like a sort of disaster in space, I mean, watch Apollo 13 or watch Gravity. Those are movies that are 10 times better than this is. This is, I mean, this is crazy to me. This is like one of the first films that was sponsored by supported by NASA. I mean, this is so lame. This is just one of those things. Like that's the best movie you could pick to support NASA. Really, is this? Um, I'm not alone though. I mean, there's a lot of people who actually worked on the film who are necessarily not really the biggest fan of it anyway. Because according to Lea Thompson, because of the numerous delays in filming, the cast and crew jokingly wore T-shirts that said "Space Cramp." And that sums up the film. That sums up the experience of watching this movie. You get space cramps. It's so boring and just paint by numbers that it's just you just sit there or you lay there watching the movie and it's just a cramp inducing experience because it's just a very uncomfortable sit. Not only because of the whole reason why the kids get into space. I mean, that's uncomfortable in and by itself because it's way too similar to the actual Challenger explosion. But then the whole thing where it's just so terminally lame. Um, I'll say this though. Okay, before I give my final thoughts on the film, I'll give the film this. Like I said, I like the score by John Williams. I just wish it was in a movie that was actually good and didn't suck. And I don't mind Lea Thompson. I didn't mind Kate Capshaw. I honestly didn't have a problem with Larry B. Scott or Tate Donavan either. Tate Donavan was inconsistent. There were times where his performance was pretty bad, but there's other times where I had some fun with him. But their characters could have been written a lot better. And Tate Donovan's character is kind of a douchebag, so he's kind of not really that likable. And I would probably say there's like a couple sequences, like the scene where Andy is trying to get the oxygen from the space station Daedalus. I didn't mind that, but everything else about the movie, I really think is not very good. I think it's fairly poor. It's pretty poor. From the production values, where did the 18 to $25 million go? This looks like a Canon film. This really looks like a Canon film. Like, I'm not talking about the higher budgeted Canon film, like Life Force. I'm talking about the lower budgeted Canon films. I mean, the effects in this are that bad at times. I don't. It's just really, just wow. I mean, there's no sense of spectacle. There's no sense of wonder. There's no sense of that. It's just a very boring, just slow paced. The film's pacing is the equivalent of somebody floating in outer space. It's a very slow thing. You're just floating in space, and the movie just moves at such a slow pace. And it's enough to put you to sleep. It really is. This isn't the best review. I'm sorry. I don't have much to say about this. It's a straightforward plot, but it's done in such a boring way that it's just hard to talk about because there's not much to talk about to begin with. But anyway, I don't know what else to say about Space Camp. Okay, Space Cramp or Space Crap. If it was to rate out of 5 stars, I would give the movie. I, I'd give it 1.5 out of 5 because I liked one sequence with the Daedalus. I like Kate Capshaw. I like Lea Thompson. I didn't mind some of the other kids, but I hate the stupid robot. I don't. I don't really like the idea of these kids getting sent into space. It's not very interesting. It does kind of trivialize the space program, to be honest. It does baffle me why NASA supported this movie, especially with the screenplay that it had. And yeah, it's just not a very exciting or fun movie to watch. Not even in a time waster way. Doesn't have a very interesting concept or a story, and or characters. So yeah, but I do like the score by John Williams, and I do like some of the music they use in the soundtrack. I mean, they got Dire Straits' "Walk of Life." They have a song called "Forever Man," which I really liked by Eric Clapton. So I would just recommend you listen to the score by John Williams and listen to "Forever Man" by Eric Clapton, and just skip this movie. But anyway, thanks for watching my review of Space Camp, and I will see you guys later. See ya.